Hey guys, hope you're doing all right. Staying safe, keeping distant, all that stuff. Really happy with the feedback I've seen so far on Monroe. It's kind of a unique experience. I'm always a little, I don't know, tentative. I'm always a little worried about how students are going to respond to Monroe right off the bat, just because, yeah, in a lot of ways it's different than the things we've read so far. But as your posts have pointed out, all these similarities thematically with O'Brien and Lahiri and Yates. You guys have just been doing a fantastic job on the Moodle page. So keep it up. Good work. I'm really happy that you guys liked Miles City, Montana so much. We're going to talk about Progress of Love today, which usually Progress of Love is the story I start off with Monroe, and I decided to switch it up a little bit with Miles City, Montana, just because not in person. Kind of, I don't know. I think Miles City, Montana may be a little bit easier story to get into, but Progress of Love is really the perfect example of the whole Monroe story as a house sort of metaphor. And I mean, even within the story, there's actually a physical house that has this sort of transformation that mimics all the sort of Russian doll-like transformations we have with ourselves. So I hope you like Progress of Love. It's a story, not unlike a lot of other Monroe stories. All right, my cat is getting ready to sneak in here. Sorry about that. It's not unlike it's like a lot of other Monroe stories in that it's about parent-child relationships. And like I said last time, this is really one of those. This is about parent-child, child-parent. You get 3 generations here. There's a point in this story where I always, every time I teach it, get confused between the narrator, her mother, and then the narrator's grandmother. And I can't help but think she's not trying to confuse us, she's not writing unclearly on purpose, but that sort of blend, that generational blending that we get, that occasionally happens in this story, I don't know, it feels just right. So it's also a story about betrayal, in a sense, betrayal of a parent to a child. It's a story about, it's right there in the title, about what love means. Love this cat, this is Bucky. He got rescued, I don't know, 3 years ago, and we never thought he'd make it, but he's made it, and he's the nicest cat you've ever seen. But you get kicked out of here if you don't stop. Anyway, so we open up Progress of Love in a room. The room is really sort of a way to show the dad, who sort of becomes this vessel for us learning about the love he had for the narrator's mom. Because by the end, the story that we hinge on is that story of the money getting burned up. But it takes us back to the time whenever she found out her mom had died. The narrator found out her mom had died. Dad calls her, takes the time to ask how she was. Sort of country person, country matters. I love the dad in this story. And he tells her that the mom's gone. And she knew that, I knew gone meant dead. I knew that before a second or so I saw my mother in her black straw hat setting off down the lane. The word gone seemed full of nothing but deep relief. Excitement you feel when a door closes, your house sinks back to normal, and you let yourself loose in the free space around you. That was the father's voice too. But he told me that he'd found my mother on the couch in the kitchen when we came in at noon. She'd picked a few tomatoes, and as he's telling her this, he's realizing that the phone is like situated right by where the mom would be, and it sort of adds a level of sense of gravity to the situation. The dad's sort of like trying to figure out what he does now. And then we get information on the mom. We go into a new room very quickly, because this is a story about a daughter, a mother, and then that mother's mother. We go back in time. My mother prayed on her knees at midday at night, first thing in the morning every day, opened up to her to have God's will done in it. Every night she taught it up to him what she'd done, said and thought. It's squared with him. That kind of life is very, people think, but they're missing the point. For one thing, such life can never be boring, and nothing can happen you can't make use of. And then we sort of get to talking about the narrator's mom's religion, and we'll find out more as the story moves along as to sort of what led her mother to be such a faithful and practicing religious person. I love the way that Monroe handles that in this story. It's never sort of looked down upon or kept at a distance. At the same time, it's not elevated. It's not overly elevated in a way that doesn't seem true. Part of that is because it's the narrator's story. We find out that the narrator's mom, was saved at a camp meeting when she was 14. It was the same summer that her own mother had died. So there's sort of clues there, at least some seeds planted of the connection between those two things. And we'll see, as with all Monroe, we sort of peel back the layers and find out more about that. For a few years, my mother went to meetings with a lot of other people who'd been saved, some who'd been saved over and over again, enthusiastic old sinners. She could tell stories about what went on at those meetings, the singing, the hollering, the wildness. She told me about an old man getting up and shouting. So it's just, exploring this life. She was back to being just an angelic and a serious one by the time she got married. She was 25. My father was 38. She describes them as a couple. I have two brothers. I have a baby sister who died. I have a feeling my father never slept with any woman before my mother. Now, this is a nice little touch here with Monroe. Sometimes the voice just doesn't know. But she's assuming. Never with her until he married. He had to wait because my mother wouldn't get married until she had paid back to her own father every cent he had spent on her since her mother died. She'd kept track of everything. Again, this is another clue that's planted in there about this very, very tense and almost toxic relationship that the narrator's mother had with her own father. So would be the narrator's grandfather. When she married, the narrator's mom had no nest egg, as teachers usually did, no hope sheets didn't, had nothing to give, monetarily speaking. My father used to say with a somber, joking face that he'd hoped to get a woman with money in the bank, but to take the money in the bank, you have to take the face that goes with it, and sometimes that's no bargain. Dad is a great character in this story. Country, congenial, funny, sort of mock distance with certain things, ironic. And here we go. We move on. So we go from introducing us to the father to introducing us to the father after the mother died, introducing us to the mother, and sort of a real short version of the mother's whole life, then to the house. And the house is like the story. I'm getting ready to sneeze. I'm sorry. It's going to happen. So this has been quite an experience so far. You got a cat, you got a sneeze. So then we get the house in the third paragraph. And the house is very much like the story. The house we lived in had big, high rooms, dark green blinds on the windows. When the blinds were pulled down against the sun, I used to like to move my head and catch the light flashing through the holes in the cracks. That's what this whole story is doing. She's catching light through the holes in the cracks in this house. That's why we're seeing these things. This is really, like I said last time, maybe even the most extreme example of something that's not even on the linear or nonlinear equation. This is just something different. This is a house. This is something put together that sometimes gets illuminated when Monroe decides to. Another thing I like looking at was the chimney stains. I like looking at, and then I could imagine them turning into faces, people's faces, distant cities. The way you can look at clouds sometimes. She looked at the stains in her chimneys. And then her husband, the narrator's husband, Dan Casey, had told her own two boys, sort of jokingly, that, see, your mom's folks were so poor they couldn't afford TV, so they had these stains on the ceiling. He always liked to kid me about thinking being poor was anything but great. Now we flash forward a little bit to when the father's older. Well, I say we flash forward. We flash forward without ever really knowing where we are in time here, and yet it never feels like we're lost. Which is, again, this is the type of story that if a creative writing student came up to me and said, "I'm going to tell a story like this," and I'm saying, "Where it's set? When's the now?" and they can't really pinpoint it down. They're sort of all over the place. I said, "Don't write that story," but Monroe certainly gets away with it. So when the father's old, I figured out that he didn't mind people doing new sorts of things as much as he minded them having new sorts of reasons for doing them. Thank God he never had to know about the commune. Now we don't know what the commune means at this point, but we will find out. It's another clue dropped in. He'd been moved to a home at the nursing home at this point. The nurses took very good care of him. They called him handsome. Told me he was real old sweetheart, real old religious gentleman. Sometimes, with all their care, he was a little unhappy. He wanted to go home. He worried about the cows, the fences, this house that he doesn't have anymore. A few flashes of meanness, very few. Once, he gave me a sneaky, unfriendly look when I went in. He said, "I'm surprised you haven't worn all the skin off your knees by now." And I laughed. I said, "What? Doing what?" "Scrubbing floors." "Praying," he said in a voice like spitting. He didn't know who he was talking to. At this point, I would ask you, who does he think he's talking to here? And it's her mother. And we get a sense that there was a lot of love there between the narrator's mother and the narrator's father. But as with anything, there might be an undercurrent of bitterness that creeps in. He's reached the point in this little room of the story where he is older, may not have all his facilities, and he's mistaken his daughter for his wife, and so he makes sort of a snide comment about her constant praying, throughout the day and that sort of thing. And we wonder, like, why would he sort of lash out this way? And not even saying it's justified, but it's part of the unraveling of this story, this mystery that takes place here as to what don't we know as we find out. Then we get the description of the mother. The mother's hair. And this narrator doesn't remember her mother's hair being anything but white. And she tries to find out what it used to be. So the mother tells her, and it's like, is it like Brent or like Dolly? She's like, is it like, she's trying to determine what color her mother's hair was by the horses they had. She's like, weren't you sad when your hair went white? She's like, no, I was glad. Why? And the narrator's mother says, I was glad that I wouldn't have hair anymore that was the same color as my father's. Hatred is always a sin, my mother told me. Remember that. One drop of hatred in your soul will spread and discolor everything like a drop of black ink in white milk. I was struck by that and meant to try it, but I knew I shouldn't waste the milk. I just got a doorbell, so I'm going to have to pause.